Hey,
Namaste, welcome to the Advice channel and the reading of The Transparency of Things by Rupert Spira. Om Sri Sadguru Ruchiji Ki Jai. Om Sri Sadguru Anantaji Ki Jai. Hope you can hear me. If you can, thumbs up. Great. Welcome to Chrissy in the Hangout. Lovely to have you here bright and early on Sunday morning. And I think we have Maya and anyone else who's joining via YouTube. So very welcome. So what we usually do is we are reading from the book, The Transparency of Things, contemplating the nature of experience. And we've been doing that for the past, since the beginning of the year almost. So there's not much left. But I read to the natural breaks in the book and have some silence. And if led in the heart, this intuitive sharing may come up, some spontaneous sharing. So, or there might not be anything. So, just so there's no expectations that we place on ourselves or on others. We'll see how the flow goes. And if you want to speak, then just unmute the mic when you feel the time's right, and then you can share. I'm just going to read the blurb on the back for anyone that's new to these readings and joining maybe later or even joining now. So the purpose of Rupert Spira's book is to look clearly and simply at the nature of experience without any attempt to change it. A series of contemplations leads us gently but directly to see that our essential nature is neither a body nor a mind. It is the conscious presence that is aware of this current experience. As such, it is nothing that can be experienced as an object, and yet it is undeniably present. However, these contemplations go much further than this. As we take our stand knowingly as this conscious presence that we always already are, and reconsider the objects of the body, mind, and world, we find that they do not simply appear to this presence, they appear within it, and further reveals that they do not simply appear within this presence, but as this presence. Finally, we are led to see that it is in fact this very presence itself that takes the shape of our experience from moment to moment, whilst always remaining only itself. We see that our experience is and has only ever been one seamless totality with no separate entities, objects, or parts anywhere to be found. So what this book beautifully does really is take you some way from perhaps ideas or an intellectual understanding to the experience by helping one to see through the beliefs, the conditioning, the beliefs we have in duality that create this sense of me in here and world out there. which is conditioning. It's certainly been seen to be the case here, that we're conditioned through everything, through media, through parenting, to experience duality. So it's never questioned. And I guess this is the process of self-inquiry, to question, to look and to see clearly the beliefs that we've been living, the beliefs we've been living by, and that have created this sense of feeling separate and fearful, and put us in conflict. And actually it's this, Rupert often asks the question, could it be that this underlying human presumption that's never questioned, that I'm separate inside here to a world outside there, could it be that that common, unquestioned presumption, human cultural presumption, is possibly responsible for the conflicts in our relationships and the conflicts we see in the world? Because the stronger that sense is, the stronger the sense of the other. And if we truly see that there is no other, ultimately there is no other. Conventionally, yes, we speak about another, but ultimately, from the level of being, whilst we might see lots of different, the mind might label lots of different objects and multiplicity of objects and selves, does that multiplicity actually, all the many different objects, does that actually divide up the sense of being? Does it divide up the overall sense of awareness? And if your only experience of other object is as your own consciousness, as this own awareness, and it cannot be any other way, it cannot be otherwise, there would be no experience of other object or world other than as this consciousness, by this consciousness. How can we assume that it's separate from that? But of course we do. Conventionally we do. But this is an opportunity to see what's really real, see what's really true about our experience. So I wasn't expecting to say any of that, so I guess it was spontaneous. Openness, sensitivity, vulnerability, and availability. If I'm honest, I want to get rid of my suffering. The ultimate cause of suffering is ignorance of our true nature. That is, the ignoring of our true nature, the ignoring of consciousness. We take that which is unreal to be real, and that which is real to be unreal. All objective experience, that is the mind, body, and world, is made out of thinking and imagining, sensing and seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. Make sure you shut the door. What happens to our entire objective experience, including all of our suffering, when all of these are removed? It vanishes. Where is suffering in deep sleep? It is non-existent. And if we go deeply into our experience at any given moment, we find that suffering is also non-existent there. In fact, deep sleep and the present moment share much in common, whilst the past and the future have much in common with the dream state. Suffering, by definition, requires the presence of a separate entity for its existence. However, that separate entity is itself non-existent, imaginary. What can we say, therefore, of this separate entity's suffering? It is no more real than the entity around which it revolves, although, of course, it is a powerful illusion. If we go deeply into the experience of suffering while it is actually taking place, we find that the one around whom the suffering revolves is not present. It is present as a thought or a sensation, but the entity itself is not present. And I should have said actually right at the beginning about suffering. Suffering is referred to here as psychological suffering, not physical pain. So it is psychological suffering, not physical pain, that is referred to here. So if we go deeply into the experience of suffering, psychological suffering, while it is actually taking place, we find that the one around whom the suffering revolves is not present. It is present as a thought or a sensation, but the entity itself is not present. So if you leave all ideas right now about what you are and just go to experience, you might report that there's hearing, sensing, there might be some thinking. And we think that this is all happening to a me, a person, a separate entity. Usually, most people. But here we're asked to look, where is that? Other than an idea, a thought. And so usually psychological suffering centers around this idea, this idea of me. in relation to other or world or some situation. So here we just look and see if this is true, if there is indeed this individual separate entity we call person, just staying with experience, awareness, a knowing, a sense of knowing, or consciousness is present, always present. First and foremost, of course, when explored more deeply, it can be found that it's the only thing that even the labels of hearing, sensing, seeing are just other ways of describing this knowing. And if our only experience of, as Rupert says, the world is seeing, hearing, sensing, and seeing, hearing, and sensing are only this knowing, and that knowing is I, the true self. Then what's really here, what's truly here, is only the self. So we would not hurt another because there is no other, there's only the self. So if we take hearing, we can ask, do we find if we're to try and explore the relationship between hearing and knowing, do we find two distinct things, hearing as distinct from knowing, or is there just knowing? If our eyes are open, we can ask the same question. We might say seeing is taking place. But do you find knowing of seeing? Do you find knowing as distinct from seeing an experience? But take a look. You find two distinct things. One, knowing, and two, seeing. Or is seeing just another word, another label for this knowing, for self? And so in this way, through inquiry, through looking, not through analysing mentally, through looking, through experience, you come to deconstruct this conditioning that frames our experience and causes the experience of separation, duality. Chrissy had to go, she needed elsewhere, so thanks for joining, Chrissy. I'm just going to go to YouTube and see. Is it Atma? Beloved Atma. Lovely to have you with us. And Amaya gives a thumbs up. So I'm guessing the sound is okay. To return to objective experience, what are thinking, imagining, sensing, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling made of? They are made of knowing or experiencing. And what would happen if knowing or experiencing were removed from them? They would vanish. Knowing or experiencing is the ingredient which is common to them all, and without which none of them exist. Thinking, imagining, sensing, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling are the particular forms that knowing or experiencing takes. And what is knowing or experiencing made of? It is made of that which is conscious, that which knows and experiences. That is, it is made of consciousness, and this consciousness is our most intimate self. What happens if we try to remove consciousness? We cannot. We cannot go further back in our experience than consciousness. If we have followed this line of reasoning, not just intellectually, but in our actual experience, we have, by the same token, whether we realize it or not, acknowledged that the real substance of every objective experience is consciousness itself. We have acknowledged that the known is made of knowing, and that knowing is made of consciousness. You, I, we, consciousness is the reality of all things. That is our moment-by-moment experience. It is our lived, intimate, direct experience, not simply an intellectual idea. That which seems to be real in every experience is a ripple within the ocean of ourself. It is made out of mind stuff, thinking, sensing, and perceiving, and it vanishes in the same way that the mind stuff out of which a dream is made vanishes. However, the substance of that mind stuff is our self, consciousness. It seems to be unreal and non-existent from the point of view of objective experience, but in fact it turns out to be the very essence, the reality of that experience. The only problem is that we take that which is unreal to be real, and that which is real to be unreal. And even that is not a problem. because that very appearance itself, that apparent problem, is itself made out of the ever-present, unchanging reality of our self-consciousness. So even the mind is, or what we label the mind is a label that's used to refer to a collection of thoughts, feelings, what exists. What do we find of mind? In the here and now, what do we find of mind? And if there's a thought, So what we usually find with mind is just the thought in this moment. To actually try and find what the experience of thought is, what it's made out of. We do that right now, so the thought, or what we might refer to as memory of breakfast, and we try and find out if that thought has a separate, independent existence or boundary. Does it have any edges? Do we find a beginning or an end? Do we find it separate from the knowing or awareness, consciousness? Or do we find that all there is to thought is in fact consciousness? But when that's overlooked, thought becomes a problem. It becomes a problem for the me. I, this separate self, then likes some thoughts and doesn't like others. Some thoughts make me more spiritual, the me more spiritual, and some thoughts make the me less spiritual. When in fact, when you look, there isn't any separate thoughts other than the label that's given to it and makes it so, makes it separate from this knowing or this consciousness. So go ahead now, it's another experiment, I guess, that a contemplation to examine the experience directly. Take a thought, whether that be what you might conventionally call negative or what you might conventionally call positive, but recognizing that these are also meanings that we arbitrarily place. So take a thought. What is the experience of that thought in the now? What is it made out of? Does it have a shape? Does it have a size? Do you find a beginning to that thought or an end? And if you do, isn't that just another thought? And do you find the knowing? Do you find knowing separate from the thought? You find like a distinct boundary where you can clearly see there's knowing and there's the thought. And if there's no boundary, if there's no experience of distinction between thought and knowing, consciousness, the self, all them terms can be used synonymously. If there's no distinction between thought, no separation between thought and knowing, what is thought other than this consciousness? So when you can clearly see this and feel this to be the case, that there is only this consciousness, with different names. When you truly feel this to be the case, There's nothing to be afraid of. Although fear, what we call fear, or may momentarily appear, but it's quickly noticed that it's only the self. And this is the experience here. So what we might traditionally call stress, frustration, anger. It may momentarily appear, but they're only ever confirmation of this consciousness, this knowing that's unbroken, not divided by any of that. And the recognition, the experience of this is deep peace, love, total openness, without any need to control or change any of it. I understand that in theory, but that's a common statement. I understand that in theory, but theoretical understanding is only possible in relation to an object. That is because when we think of an object, the mind forms an image or a concept of that object, but never actually comes in contact with the object itself. The mind forms a representation of the apparent object in the terms of its own code, that is, in images and concepts. However, the thought about consciousness is different. The mind cannot represent that which has no objective qualities. So when it goes towards consciousness, it collapses. It just cannot go there. How could a three-dimensional object enter a two-dimensional plane? How could a two-dimensional plane enter a one-dimensional point? And how could the one-dimensional object of mind enter the zero-dimensional space of consciousness? This collapse of the mind as it tries to see or understand consciousness reveals the ever-present consciousness that was veiled by the very activity of seeking. This collapse of the mind as it tries to see or understand consciousness reveals the ever-present consciousness that was veiled by the very activity of seeking. This does not deny the validity of seeking. On the contrary, it validates it. The value of seeking is that as long as it is taken all the way back to its source, it brings itself to its own limit and dissolves there. That into which it dissolves is that for which it was seeking. Thinking cannot get rid of thinking, but it can go to the limit of thinking. Seeking cannot get rid of seeking, but it can go to the end of seeking. If seeking is not denied or frustrated, if it is allowed to run its full course, it will come to its natural limit. However, it is consciousness that dissolves the seeking thought, just as water dissolves the sugar cube. Seeking should be allowed to run its course, for it is in the dissolution of thinking, not in the frustration of thinking, that consciousness is revealed, that consciousness tastes itself. Seeking never finds what it is looking for. It is dissolved in it. From the mind's point of view, it is the end of seeking, rather than its fulfillment, that brings about the revelation of presence. From the point of view of reality, it is the experience of consciousness recognizing itself that brings about the end of seeking. However, this should not be taken as an incentive to stop seeking. On the contrary, it can be taken as an indication that seeking should run its full course, should fully explore its own limits. Only then will the mind come to an end, naturally, in understanding. This understanding is itself the experience of consciousness, knowing itself knowingly. This is a very different situation from one in which the mind is frustrated as a result of having its validity denied, or whose natural inquisitiveness is disciplined through effort. Such a mind is never truly brought to an end. It is not peaceful. It is suppressed. Such a mind simply forms a belief, and in doing so, it perpetuates itself. It rests on that belief, falls asleep on it, anesthetizes itself, fooling itself into thinking that it has come to an end. This is not understanding, it is inertia. The process of exploring the nature of experience is the process through which the mind is truly brought to its limit. The mind does not find understanding. It dies in it.
Got it.
The process of exploring the nature of experience is the process through which the mind is truly brought to its limit. The mind does not find. Welcome, Maria. Yes, Dave. Just going to shut the door. It's a bit noisy. But how is this non-objective understanding applied to our very real objective lives? We don't try to apply it. We simply let this understanding express itself naturally in our life. Have we been applying ignorance to our life all these years? No. We just mistook appearances for reality. And that attitude, of its own accord, conditioned our subsequent experience very efficiently, without our having to make a special effort to apply it. We do not need to apply ignorance to our lives to make it effective. It works very nicely by itself. Similarly, understanding. If we have understood in our own way what has been said here, we just allow that understanding to express itself naturally. It will condition our life in just the same way that our previous understanding conditioned our life effortlessly. When we go into a darkened room, we see nothing to begin with. Slowly shapes start to emerge until in the end we see quite clearly. We do not have to do anything to facilitate this. It happens naturally. On the outside, there may or may not be much change. Sorry, I've missed out a part. When we go into a darkened room, we see nothing to begin with. Slowly shapes start to emerge until in the end we see quite clearly. We do not have to do anything to facilitate this. It happens naturally. Likewise here, understanding, which is not a knowing of something, but rather knowingness itself, permeates every aspect of our life from an unknown direction. It just happens naturally. On the outside, there may or may not be much change. That is not important. But on the inside, there is more and more peace, freedom, happiness, and love. Old habits still come up, but as they are no longer fueled by mistaken ideas, they show up less and less frequently. This change happens either gradually or rapidly. It doesn't matter. Who is the one that cares? That one is non-existent. Perhaps some of these habits may stay around forever. So what? We all have characters that are conditioned at the level of the body and mind. Advaita non-dualism is not a bland whitewash of all the individual elements in each of our characters. In fact, it is rather the opposite. Individuality means undivided. Individuality is the unique expression of the undivided whole, which each body-mind expresses, and it tends to flourish rather than diminish. When we are relieved of the straitjacket of ignorance, that is, when we stop ignoring ourselves. Similarly, non-dualism is not an immunization against feeling. In fact, it is the opposite. Hi, Maria. Can I just ask you to mute the mic for a second? Thanks. Similarly, non-dualism is not an immunization against feeling. In fact, it is the opposite. It is complete openness, sensitivity, vulnerability, and availability. Actually, suffering is our resistance to feeling, rather than a feeling itself. So we don't try to use this understanding, we allow it to use us. We allow it to shape our life. We don't put it into another straitjacket and dictate how it should operate. Consciousness is absolute freedom. We allow this freedom to express itself as it will, how it will, where it will, and when it will. In one body-mind, this might take the shape of a character that is quiet and sensitive, whilst in another it may express itself in a wild and exuberant way. We should not be misled by appearances. It is the attitude of inner freedom that is the hallmark of understanding. And this attitude of inner freedom uses all possible means of expression and communication. This consciousness being total freedom is totally open, allows all expressions, all feeling, thoughts, And actually, this is all naturally, spontaneously taking place. I don't know what my next thought will be, what my next words will be until they're spoken. There's no specific individual entity that can be found that's doing thinking. That's doing feeling, that's doing resisting. All expressions, thoughts, experiences are happening, are taking place naturally. Awareness has no argument. Even resistance in the thought, I don't like this, I don't agree with this, which is just a thought, is also allowed by this presence of awareness. So what we call or refer to as resistance is even allowed. But even to call it resistance is to suggest that it's separate from this consciousness. That again we can ask and look in our own experience, do we find what we label resistance to be separate from the knowing of it? Do we find a distinct cut-off point where, yes, here's knowing, here's awareness, and yes, that's when the thought or the resistance begins? And if that's not our experience, if we can't find that boundary that separates the two things, thought from consciousness, resistance from consciousness or awareness or knowing, if we don't find that boundary, then what is that thought other than knowing itself and this consciousness? So when you come into the experience the recognition that all is only just this knowing that we give different labels to. It's just this one knowing, this one consciousness. From seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, thinking, when this becomes experience, then all expressions, all appearances can just play without this idea of a me needing to get rid of some or acquire other appearances that need to control, to avoid. Seems to dissolve because there is only this. And it's the overlooking that all is only this knowing, aware presence. It's the overlooking of that in favour of the idea and belief in the thoughts that it's all separate. That creates this suffering. Creates this idea that or the belief in the idea that things can happen to me that I don't like. So I think I'm going to end there. Thank you very much for joining. Nice to see you in the Hangout, Maria. Thanks for everyone that's joined on YouTube. And it's been lovely just to share in this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see at YouTube because I can just now, but I'll see by YouTube. Thank you, David. I was relaxing a lot. I was feeling quite well. Thank you.
It's so beautiful to be part of the Sangha. I'm very, very grateful. Very, very grateful. And it's from this gratitude really that this sharing comes. None of this understanding came through some idea of my own. It's just naturally flowed and been shared and confirmed and recognized through the masters Mujiji, Nantaji, Ramana, Rupert, beautiful masters. They're just sharing in the recognition that this is not exclusive to any expert. It's actually what we all already are. And it's this pointing, this confirming for ourselves, looking at our experience, that means we can come into that recognition too. So I'm very, very grateful for this understanding to be present here. I hope that this becomes your experience, that it becomes recognized and confirmed in your own hearts. That there truly is no separation. Thank you for joining. Om Shri Sadguru Mujiji Ki Jai. Om Shri Sadguru Anantaji Ki Jai.